The lights of the View studio glowed warmly as Whoopi Goldberg adjusted her earpiece, getting ready for yet another episode. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, and the co-hosts Sunny Hostin, Joy Behar, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sarah Haynes chatted among themselves as the countdown to the live broadcast began. But today was no ordinary day. The guest for this episode was none other than Karoline Leavitt, the sharp-witted and fiercely unapologetic White House press secretary under President Donald Trump. At just 27 years old, she had quickly made a name for herself as a rising Republican firebrand, unafraid to take on the mainstream media. She had been invited to discuss the administration's latest policies, but behind the scenes, the producers knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't just an interview. It was a clash waiting to happen. Whoopi, a longtime vocal critic of Trump, had already made her feelings about Leavitt clear before the cameras rolled. "This girl is just another mouthpiece for the nonsense coming out of that White House," she had scoffed in the dressing room. "I won't be taking it easy on her." As the theme music played and the hosts introduced themselves, the atmosphere was charged. The audience erupted in a mix of cheers and boos when Karoline Leavitt walked onto the set in a sharp red blazer, exuding confidence. She knew exactly what kind of reception she would get, but she was more than ready. The first few minutes went as expected: talk about inflation, immigration, and the upcoming election. Karoline defended Trump's policies with the kind of polished precision that had made her a rising star in conservative circles. Joy Behar and Sunny Hostin pressed her hard, but she held her ground. Then Whoopi leaned forward, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Karoline, let's get real here. The American people aren't buying what you're selling. You stand up there in that briefing room and lie for Donald Trump every single day. How do you sleep at night knowing you're part of an administration that spreads misinformation?" A murmur went through the crowd. Some clapped. Others gasped. Karoline, unfazed, smiled. "Whoopi, I think the real question is, how do you sleep at night knowing you push the same tired left-wing talking points that keep America divided? You sit here every day pretending to be the moral authority, but the truth is, millions of Americans don't trust you or the media anymore." The audience reacted with an electric mix of cheers and boos, sensing that this conversation was about to go off the rails. Whoopi's eyes narrowed. "You've got a lot of nerve, young lady." Karoline leaned back in her chair. "And you've got a lot of hypocrisy, Whoopi. Maybe it's time someone called you out on it." Joy Behar stepped in, attempting to shift the conversation, but the tension had already reached a boiling point. Whoopi wasn't about to let this go. "Listen, sweetheart," Whoopi said, her voice laced with condescension. "I've been doing this a long time. You're just another mouthpiece who's going to fade away when this administration crashes and burns." Karoline tilted her head. "I think the real question is, Whoopi, how much longer are you going to be able to sit there and insult people before someone finally does something about it?" Silence. Whoopi's face darkened. "Excuse me." Karoline didn't blink. "You heard me." And with that, the entire studio was on the edge of their seats, waiting for the next explosion. The silence on the View set was thick enough to cut with a knife. The tension between Whoopi Goldberg and Karoline Leavitt was no longer just a heated debate, it was personal. Whoopi adjusted her glasses, her lips pressed into a tight line. "You think you're tough, huh?" she said, her voice lower, colder. "I've faced bigger and badder people than you, honey." Karoline, maintaining her composure, smiled thinly. "I'm sure you have, Whoopi. But unlike most of your guests, I'm not here to play nice or let you push a false narrative." Joy Behar leaned forward, waving her hands as if to cool the flames. "All right, ladies, let's take a breath. We're here to discuss policy, not throw punches." But Whoopi wasn't about to back down. "No, Joy, I'm not letting this one slide," she snapped. "I'm sick and tired of people like her coming on this show and acting like they're saving America while working for a man who's tearing it apart." Karoline arched an eyebrow, her voice calm but cutting. "What you're sick of, Whoopi, is people who don't fall in line with your agenda. And guess what? America's sick of it too. That's why President Trump is still here and why people like me are willing to stand up to bullies like you." The crowd stirred, some cheering Karoline's boldness, others booing her defiance. The live comments section on social media exploded with reactions. Fans of The View called Karoline disrespectful while Trump supporters praised her for standing firm. Whoopi leaned closer to the table, her voice a growl. "You sit there talking about bullies while working for the biggest bully in America. Don't talk to me about hypocrisy, sweetheart." Karoline didn't flinch. "If you really cared about truth and fairness, you'd be willing to listen to a perspective that doesn't fit your echo chamber. But you don't want a conversation, you want to control the narrative. And sorry, Whoopi, but you don't control me." At that, Whoopi slammed her hand on the table. The sound echoed across the studio. "You're out of line," she barked. And if you can't respect this platform, maybe you shouldn't be here at all. Karoline leaned back, her smile unwavering. Careful, Whoopi. You're starting to sound like you're scared of what I have to say. Joy, growing visibly nervous, tried once more to redirect the conversation. Okay, let's move on. Karoline, let's talk about the administration's plans for the economy. But Karoline wasn't finished. I'll gladly talk about that, she said, turning toward Joy. But first, I want to say something. She shifted her gaze back to Whoopi. I came here knowing you'd try to shout me down. You've built your career by tearing people apart who disagree with you. But the truth is, you're not as powerful as you think. And you don't get to decide who gets a voice in this country. Whoopi's face burned with anger. I've earned my place at this table, something you could never understand. Karoline tilted her head. What you've earned is a free pass to silence anyone who challenges you. But not today. Producers in the control room exchanged frantic glances. The script was long forgotten, this was live TV in complete freefall. The executive producer's voice crackled over the earpieces. Somebody shut this down. But before anyone could stop her, Karoline leaned forward and dropped the bombshell. You know what, Whoopi, she said. If you can't handle someone who disagrees with you, maybe it's you who doesn't belong here anymore. The studio gasped. Whoopi shot up from her seat, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You think you can come on my show and tell me what to do? She shouted. You're nothing but a mouthpiece for a corrupt administration. Karoline, cool as ever, stood up too. And you're a relic of a media elite that's losing its grip on America. Security hovered just off camera, waiting for the signal to intervene. The co-hosts sat frozen, too shocked to speak. And then it happened. Karoline turned to the producers behind the cameras and said, clear as day, if The View wants to survive in today's America, it's time for real conversations, not this one-sided nonsense. And if Whoopi can't handle that, maybe it's time she takes a break. The producers hesitated for only a moment before the voice in Whoopi's earpiece finally crackled. We're going to commercial now. The screen faded to black, but the fallout was just beginning. The moment the screen cut to black, the studio erupted into chaos. Whoopi Goldberg yanked out her earpiece and slammed it on the table. I'm not doing this, she hissed, storming off the stage. The remaining co-hosts exchanged wide-eyed glances while the audience murmured, unsure whether they had just witnessed a planned spectacle or an unscripted meltdown. Karoline Leavitt, meanwhile, stood confidently by her chair, watching Whoopi's retreat with a faint smirk. The producers swarmed onto the set, whispering frantically into their headsets. A young assistant, pale and sweating, approached Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, we may need to cut your segment short. Karoline turned to the assistant, her voice calm. Why? Because I refuse to be bullied? I'm happy to stay and finish our conversation if your hosts can handle it. Upstairs in the executive producer's office, tempers flared. Rachel Porter, the show's longtime executive producer, paced the floor, phone pressed against her ear. I don't care what Whoopi wants, she snapped. We can't afford another PR disaster. If she walks out live on air, the network's going to implode. Rachel's assistant, clutching a tablet loaded with social media reactions, interrupted. Twitter is on fire. Hashtag Karoline vs. Whoopi is trending #1. Some people are calling for Whoopi to be fired, others want Karoline banned from daytime TV. Rachel pinched the bridge of her nose. Get Whoopi back on set. I don't care how you do it. And tell legal to prepare a statement, this is about to get messy. Down in the green room, Whoopi paced angrily while Joy Behar tried to calm her down. You can't let her get under your skin, Joy murmured. She's just here to stir the pot. If you walk away now, she wins. She doesn't win anything, Whoopi shot back. I've been doing this for decades. No rookie Trump mouthpiece is going to tell me how to run my show. At that moment, Rachel Porter entered, her expression severe. Whoopi, we need you back on set. Now. I'm not sitting at that table with her, Whoopi declared. Rachel folded her arms. Then you're giving her exactly what she wants. The network won't protect you if you walk out live. They're already breathing down my neck about how you've been handling conservative guests. If you leave, they'll spin this as you being intolerant. Is that how you want your legacy to end? Whoopi's jaw clenched. She knew Rachel was right. The View had survived scandals before, but walking off during a live broadcast could damage her career in ways no public apology could fix. Finally, Whoopi exhaled sharply. Fine. But I'm not letting her get the last word. When the show returned from commercial break, the atmosphere had shifted. Whoopi was back in her chair, her face carefully composed, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. Karoline, still poised and collected, smiled politely. Glad you came back, she said sweetly. I was starting to think you couldn't handle a real debate. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice slow and deliberate. Listen, sweetheart. I've been handling debates before you were even born. You don't scare me, and your little stunts won't change the fact that people see right through this administration's lies. Karoline met her gaze head-on. It's not a stunt, Whoopi. It's the truth. And maybe it's time daytime TV reflects the voices of real Americans, not just your Hollywood bubble. The audience stirred again, torn between loyalty to their beloved co-host and admiration for Karoline's unapologetic stance. Sarah Haynes, eager to diffuse the tension, cut in. Let's get back to policy, you. But Whoopi wasn't done. No, she interrupted, her tone sharp. I want to know something, Karoline. Do you really believe half the garbage that comes out of Trump's mouth, or are you just cashing the checks? Karoline's smile faded. I believe in giving the American people the truth even when it's uncomfortable. And if that truth makes you or anyone else on this panel uncomfortable, maybe you need to ask yourselves why. The room went dead silent. And then, in a move no one expected, Karoline looked directly into the camera. I'll say this to the audience at home, the days of the mainstream media controlling the narrative are over. You deserve honesty, and if people like Whoopi can't handle that, maybe it's time for a new generation of voices to step in. The camera zoomed in on Whoopi's face, stone-cold, furious. And just like that, Karoline Leavitt had shifted the balance of power on one of America's most iconic talk shows. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Every eye was fixed on Whoopi Goldberg and Karoline Leavitt. Two titans locked in a battle neither was willing to lose. Rachel Porter, watching from the control room, felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just another heated segment. This was a cultural earthquake playing out live on national television. She knew the network executives were already calling emergency meetings, and advertisers were beginning to ask questions. The future of The View and Whoopi's position was hanging by a thread. Back on set, Whoopi's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level. You're sitting here talking about honesty, she said, her words slow and deliberate. But the truth is, you and your administration couldn't care less about the American people. You defend a man who built his career on lies, division, and fear. Karoline folded her hands neatly on the table. And you defend a media empire that shuts down anyone who doesn't conform to your worldview. The American people are tired of being lectured by Hollywood elites who think they know what's best for them. A ripple of murmurs swept through the live audience. Even Joy Behar, a seasoned veteran of televised debates, seemed uncertain about how to proceed. For once, she had no witty comeback. Whoopi's patience snapped. Let me tell you something, sweetheart. This show has been a platform for women to speak their minds for over 25 years. I've earned my place here by standing up for what's right. And I'm not going to let a mouthpiece for a corrupt administration tell me otherwise. Karoline didn't flinch. Maybe you earned your place once, Whoopi. But lately, all you do is shout down anyone who disagrees with you. That's not empowering, that's censorship. The crowd gasped audibly. This wasn't just a debate. It was a full-scale rebellion against one of the most recognizable faces on television. And then Karoline delivered the final blow. You talk about giving women a voice, but only if they agree with you, she said, her tone razor-sharp. Maybe it's time this show practices what it preaches and makes room for voices that represent all Americans, not just your liberal bubble. Whoopi, visibly shaking with anger, leaned in. You think you can come on my show and tell me how to do my job? Karoline smiled coolly. I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm asking whether you're still the right person for it. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Rachel Porter, still in the control room, knew they had crossed the point of no return. She turned to her assistant. Prepare the press release, she muttered. We're not getting out of this clean. Back on stage, Whoopi stood up. I don't need to sit here and take this, she snapped. I've been doing this long before you got here, and I'll still be here when you're nothing but a footnote. Karoline rose too, meeting Whoopi's glare with unwavering confidence. Funny, because the way things are going, I'm not so sure about that. The audience's murmurs turned into full-blown chaos. People were pulling out their phones, recording the live meltdown as security edged closer to the stage, waiting for the call to intervene. Joy Behar, desperate to regain control, tried one last time. Ladies, let's take a breath before... But it was too late. Karoline turned toward the producers behind the cameras. I'll finish this conversation with any of the other hosts, but I'm done being shouted down by someone who can't handle the truth. And then came the words that shook the foundation of daytime television. "I'm requesting that Whoopi be removed from this discussion or I'm leaving." The crowd gasped. Joy Behar's jaw dropped. Even Sunny Hostin, usually unflappable, looked stunned. Rachel's voice crackled through the host's earpieces. "Cut to commercial now." The screen faded to black for the second time that morning. And the war for the view had officially begun. When the cameras cut to black, the studio descended into chaos. Producers scrambled across the set, their headsets buzzing with frantic voices from the control room. Whoopi Goldberg stood off to the side, still fuming, while Karoline Leavitt remained at the table, calm and composed. The audience, unsure whether they had witnessed a planned showdown or a genuine implosion, whispered among themselves. In the green room, Rachel Porter paced back and forth, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. "I don't care how big of a star she is," she hissed to an unseen executive. "We cannot afford to alienate half the country. If we let this spiral, the network will have our heads." Her assistant tapped nervously on her tablet. "Social media is out of control, Rachel. Hashtag Karoline versus Whoopi is still trending #1. Conservatives are cheering Karoline as a hero and others are demanding Whoopi's resignation. Even major news outlets are picking it up." Rachel took a deep breath. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a corporate crisis. She had always known Whoopi's no-nonsense attitude could be risky, but this time the fallout was nuclear. And with an election year approaching, the network couldn't afford to be seen as biased or out of touch. She hung up the phone and stormed back to the stage. Back under the blinding studio lights, Whoopi was still seething. "I've given everything to this show," she snapped, glaring at Rachel as she approached. "And now you're going to let some Trump puppet come in and undermine everything we've built?" Rachel's face was a mask of corporate calm, but her voice was steel. "Whoopi, you crossed a line. You walked out during a live broadcast and lost control. The network is furious. They want an immediate response, and I need to know, are you willing to apologize?" Whoopi scoffed. "Apologize? To her? Never." Rachel sighed. "Then you're forcing my hand. Karoline has every right to demand fair treatment. And like it or not, she represents a voice that millions of Americans feel isn't being heard. If you refuse to compromise, I may have no choice but to fire me." Whoopi cut in. "Go ahead. But when this show crumbles without me, don't expect me to clean up the mess." Before Rachel could respond, Karoline stepped forward, her tone cool and professional. "I didn't come here to get anyone fired," she said. "I came to have a conversation. But if the view is going to stay relevant, it has to reflect more than just one side of the political spectrum." Rachel nodded slowly, the gears turning in her mind. Karoline had made a point the network's higher-ups couldn't ignore. For years, The View had leaned heavily left, but America's shifting political landscape meant the show couldn't afford to alienate half its audience anymore. By the time the show returned from its extended commercial break, the energy in the room had shifted. Whoopi was gone. In her place, Karoline Leavitt sat poised, flanked by Joy Behar and Sunny Hostin. Joy forced a smile, trying to keep the tension from boiling over. "Well, folks," she said, "things got a little heated earlier, but that's because these conversations matter. Karoline, we appreciate you sticking around." Karoline smiled graciously. "I'm happy to be here, Joy. And I'm happy to engage in real, honest discussions because the American people deserve that." Though the conversation moved on to policy issues, the elephant in the room was impossible to ignore. The absence of Whoopi Goldberg loomed large. Social media exploded with speculation. Was Whoopi fired? Did she quit? What would this mean for the future of The View? By the time the episode wrapped, one thing was clear: daytime television would never be the same again. The next day, the network wasted no time addressing the controversy. That morning, an official statement landed on every major news outlet. After careful consideration, ABC and Whoopi Goldberg have mutually agreed to part ways. "We thank Whoopi for her years of dedication and her voice on The View and wish her all the best in her future endeavors. Moving forward, we remain committed to providing a platform for diverse voices and robust discussions that reflect the evolving American landscape." The headlines were explosive. Whoopi Goldberg out at The View, Karoline Leavitt shakes up daytime TV. A new era? Conservative voices take center stage on The View. Is this the end of celebrity activism in mainstream media? In the days that followed, Karoline Leavitt's profile skyrocketed. Interviews, guest appearances, and even murmurs of a permanent position on the show flooded the media. To her supporters, she had done the impossible, taking on a Hollywood icon and winning. Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg remained defiant. In a fiery Instagram post, she told her fans, "I may not be sitting at that table anymore, but trust me, I'm not done speaking truth to power. But behind the scenes, insiders whispered that her departure marked a turning point. For years, progressive voices had dominated platforms like The View, but Karoline's bold confrontation proved that the cultural pendulum was swinging back. 1 month later, the revamped View returned with a new tagline, "Different Voices, Real Conversations." Karoline Leavitt was officially announced as a rotating guest host alongside a broader panel representing both sides of the aisle. In living rooms across America, viewers tuned in, eager to see how the show had changed. Some celebrated the shift. Others mourned the loss of Whoopi's commanding presence. But no one could deny that The View was no longer the safe, predictable talk show it once was. And at the heart of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, the woman who had taken on a cultural institution and walked away victorious.